The module of statistics, ultimately, is looking at data and finding different ways to interpret it. But in order to be able to interpret this data, you need to have got it from somewhere in the first place. And this is where sampling comes in. Now, as you go through like papers and questions within the module, there's not going to be an extensive amount asking about this sampling stuff. But still, there may just be like part of a question with saying, what method did they use to get this data? Or what are the advantages and disadvantages of this method? And so in order to answer these, you nevertheless need to be familiar with the different methods available. With that in mind, let's just go through them now. To start off with, you may have simple random. And for this, we're saying that everyone has an equal chance of being selected, that there is no bias in the data collection. So an equal chance, no bias. Well, that's clearly an advantage of this method. You don't want your conclusions to be impaired somewhat by the fact that there was some bias in either your collection itself or any part of your method. That being said, there's a risk here that you could miss some pertinent data. Let's say you're looking at the opinions of people living in a town. You may, by chance, only happen to talk to people with a positive opinion on this thing, and you completely miss everyone with a negative opinion. That's just the risk of it being truly random. What you might do for this method is say, assign everyone a number, use a random number generator, and then just ask the people who have the number that the machine spat out. Or you can put names in a hat and draw names out randomly, anything like that. Secondly is opportunity. An opportunity is where you're asking the first X people that you come across. People who take surveys in the streets, this is what they're doing. It's just they want to ask 20 people. So the first 20 people that come by, they'll ask, get the opinions of. Once they have managed to collect 20 pieces of data, they'll then just go home. Again, the benefit here is that this is fast in theory, because you've reached that number and then you're done. Disadvantage, again, there's a risk of missing data, also skewed data. It may be that all the people who you find at once are coming to you at once because they are of a similar mindset or a similar kind of person. They're going to that place at this time for a reason. You're not getting much variety in the people that you're interviewing. Third is census. Census is where you talk to the entire population. Now, that doesn't have to be the population of a country, it's just the population of whatever it is you're looking into. If you're thinking about looking into what students think of teachers, the population would be the student body of that school. If you're looking at opinions in a town, the population is the town. Every few years, the government does a census where it just keeps track of, who's living where, who has what jobs, etc. The advantage here is that you are asking everyone. You get everyone's opinions or knowledge or input, and this means that the data from which you're going to draw your conclusions is truly representative. However, as you might imagine, depending on the population size, this can take a long time, and depending on what it is you're actually doing, say you're doing a questionnaire, you need to print stuff off and whatever, that's expensive. Systematic is our fourth. Systematic is where you ask every X person, or I'll say nth person because that's easier. So similar to simple random, maybe you assign everyone a number. And there's, okay, I'm going to talk to every fifth person. Again, throughout this, I'm saying person for the examples. It doesn't have to be people, it's whatever you're looking into. But yeah, it's every nth person. This guarantees that you get a spread of data from across the population. However, again, just like simple random, there is a risk that by happenstance you miss certain data points because you happen by chance to only talk to certain people. Coming into the last two, these are slightly more developed. in that they both involve splitting the population into groups based on a readily identifiable characteristic. So let's say you're basing it on gender or age or something like that. Not something really obscure like what they had for breakfast, right? So you're splitting into identifiable groups, and then with quota, what you're looking to get is equal representation from each group. So split into groups and equal representation. So let's say you're looking into a student body, you've got male students and female students, non-binary students. You're wanting to speak to maybe exactly 10 of each, so that you get a fair representation and equal representation. Stratified, on the other hand, again, you're splitting into groups, but this time you're not looking for equal representation. You're looking for proportional representation. And what I mean by that is to say, if one group within the population is 4 times as big as the other group, your sample size should have 4 times as many from the big group as people from the small group. This, because of this, stratified sampling is the one version of sampling that has an equation, and that's what we see on the right here in red. So the group size divided by the population size times by your desired sample size gives you how many people from each group you should take into your sample. If this happens to give you a decimal, you obviously can't ask a fraction of a person, so you'd round to the nearest number, or you would, and if you did that, if that ended up giving you either like one more or one less than your desired sample size in total, it'd be up to you to decide whether you want to adjust your parameter, your individual group sizes slightly in terms of how you've selected them, or you just say, okay, I'll ask one more person. For an example of how this may be presented then, you could have that there are 64 girls and 56 boys in a school year group. Describe how you would take a sample group of 15 by, firstly, simple random, and secondly, stratified. For the simple random, you can use that method of you put everyone's name into a hat on pieces of paper and you pick out 15 random pieces of paper. Or you give everyone a number, use a random number generator and speak to the 15 people whose numbers were spat out by the generator. As for the stratified, here we'll get an example of how we're going to use our equation. So for the girls, the group size is 64. The total population size, if you add together the 64 and the 56, gives you 120. The desired sample size is 15, so if you just plug that into your calculator, 64 divided by 120 times by 15, that gives you a sample size of the girls of 8. Doing the same for the boys, we'll have our 56 over 120 times by 15. That's going to give you a sample of the boys of 7. If we're right with that, let's just have a look at what an example question would be. So here we have that Charlie is studying the time it takes members of his company to travel to the office. He stands by the door to the office from 8:40 to 8:50 one morning and asks workers as they arrive how long their journey was. State the sample method that Charlie uses. Well, because he's just asking people as they turn up, that will be opportunity. But the opportunity can also be called convenience sampling. Opportunity. Then state and briefly describe an alternative method of non-random sampling Charlie could have used to obtain the sample. So non-random, okay, we want to be specific in who we're selecting then. One of the, again, the non-random sampling could be quota. So let's say that rather than this time, I don't know, splitting the workers up into groups based on what they are as workers, let's just say, okay, we'll split this up into minutes, right? So let's say you've got the people who turn up between 8:40 and 8:45, and the people who turn up between 8:45 and 8:50. Those are the two groups you have split your population into, the population being the people who turn up in that window. You will then maybe take 5 people from each of those windows. So as the people come in between 8:40 and 8:45, you'll specifically talk to 5 of those people, assuming that enough people turn up, presumably it would. Then similarly, between 8:45 and 8:50, you would speak to another 5 people. So you have 10 people you've spoken to in total, and it's from across the time span split evenly. If in the first time window not enough people turned up, you would just have to be sure that come the second time window, you spoke to that exact same number of people. Okay, so the main thing here is that we will be using quota, for instance, as an example. Lastly, Taruni decides to ask every member of a company the time X minutes it takes them to travel to the office. State the data selection process Taruni used. Well, she's asked every member, so that makes that a census. This is more or less the kind of question, as I say, that you would be presented with. Usually it would be like an individual, like A or B part in a question, where you've already been working things through, and you just have to be able to identify, okay, read the description carefully. Is it this? Is it that? If it asks about advantages and disadvantages, just think rationally, what's good about this and what potentially could be better.